Okay, so thank you all for coming this evening. This is our second Community Advisory Committee meeting for the 2024-2044 Comprehensive Plan. Just like our last meeting, Alex Stupi will be basically leading the first part of the presentation, and then Anita Marrero will be giving an overview of housing policy as it relates to our housing action plan. We are going to allow public comments this evening if the Davises are interested. If not, we'll continue on. I don't believe we have anybody online. No, yes, no.
Hello, everybody. I'm Susan Davis and Plants and Lonnie. We're very interested in affordable housing and increasing the supply of the housing for people that need it. So we're just here to observe and hear what y'all want to talk about.
It's all you, Alex.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and sorry for not be able to be with you in person tonight, but we should have a solid meeting. We have a full agenda. We'll step through some specific elements. Before we do, though, just let's do a quick round of introductions, and maybe Kate, you can help me with folks that are in the room. Maybe going around the table. Kate, do you want to start with yourself, and then just kind of move around the table to introduce everybody, introduce themselves, and then we'll move on to the people who are online.
I'm actually going to start with Hannah.
Oh, or Hannah, sorry. That's a problem with the owl. I don't know who sits at the front of the table, so.
Teacher Lil, planning manager.
Lance Bailey, community development director.
Victor Scarpelli, Monroe School District.
Kevin Hanford, council. Tony Paul, Community Health Human Service Advisory Board.
Brandy Blair, Planning Commission.
Jay Bull, Planning Commission. Carl Lewa, EDAP.
Jesse Robinson, Park Board.
All right, great. And then online, Anita, do you want to introduce yourself?
Anita Marrero, Senior Planner of the City of Monroe.
All right, and Peggy.
Hi, I'm Peggy. I am the library manager for the Monroe Library.
Great. And Janelle?
Hi, everyone. Janelle Drews, Executive Director of the Monroe Chamber of Commerce and EDAB.
Great. Thank you, Janelle. James.
Hello, James Harrigan. I'm on the Human Service Board. Sorry, I can't be there in person, but glad to be here.
Problem. Thank you for coming. And Sungyo.
Hi, everyone. Sungyo Lee at MIG. And I see some familiar faces from the community kickoff, and I'm so glad to meet you all again. Yeah.
Great, thank you, Sungyo. And once again, I'm Alex Stupi. I'm the principal and project manager for the Monroe Comprehensive Plan update. And so thank you for being with us tonight. So we have about 2 hours. If we don't take that long, that's certainly okay. If we do, we will certainly endeavor to get you out of here by 9 o'clock, because I know it starts to get late and everybody's had a busy day. But just to begin, let's go ahead and share the agenda, just so we can step through that, make sure that's okay with everybody to move forward. Can you all see that all right? The agenda? Okay. So we'll step through, my first piece, we're stepping through the agenda to make sure there's no additional items that anybody else wants to talk about. We'll talk just a little bit about our meeting last during when it was at September, I believe, when we met last, just to talk about some of those key outcomes. Then also we want to provide you a city council update. We met with city council last week about the land use scenarios and want to give you an update. Primarily this evening, though, is really going to be talking about getting into the meat of the policy framework. And so we're going to talk about 3 main elements this evening. One is about the overall Monroe 2044 plan organization. This is something Kate and Lance and Anita, I hope you can help me with in this discussion as well. You know, how we're thinking about reorganizing the document to a degree to make it both easier to implement as well as to be able to access by the community. So we'll step through some elements for that. We want to talk about the vision and guiding principles, which are the first kind of guiding elements of the comprehensive plan and the policy framework. And then at around 8 o'clock or so, maybe a little earlier, I'm going to turn it over to Anita, who's going to talk about middle housing. As many of you know, middle housing is one of the biggest elements that's different than the last update for the comprehensive plan. So we want to just make sure everybody's up to speed on what those new requirements are. We want to talk about some of the existing resources that the city has in its housing action plan, and then start to get into what some elements are that we're starting to think about from a policy and development code standpoint. So we're not going to come to decision tonight on those policy elements. It's really about starting to talk about what those key components will be. And then in 2024, that's when we're really starting to get into some of the nitty gritty of the policy. We wanted to bring middle housing to you early though, because it is, I think, one of the kind of the biggest topics that both the community the community's been talking about, as well as kind of the regulatory world and how that affects both the policy and the development code implementation after the comp plan's adopted. So we just want to have a good conversation and make sure that we're all on the same page for that. Any other agenda items or key items of business that we need to cover tonight that should be on the agenda? All right, Kate, Lance, anything from the room?
Nope, we're good.
All right, thank you. So just as a quick recap, and I apologize, we do have a meeting summary that I neglected to send out. I'll get that to you after this meeting. But at our last CAC meeting, that was our kickoff. We stepped through a project charter, essentially how we'll operate as a group. We all agreed to that charter, which is pretty straightforward, but is a good series of marching orders for us. The majority of the last meeting was really talking about those land use scenarios. And we talked a lot about where specific uses should be placed on the maps for consideration, some key elements around equity along corridors and within existing neighborhoods, particularly in areas that are identified as redevelopable through the county's buildable lands inventory, but also looking at locations, really considering both critical areas as well as kind of just dispersal of different types of uses, not just focusing on south of US 2 or along Main Street or on downtown, but also looking at areas and ways to provide services in other locations, including neighborhoods along main streets. And so we went ahead and made those changes in the maps. We presented those, both your discussion with the CAC, also the discussion with the Planning Commission to the City Council last week with your recommendations and the discussion elements. And the City Council approved unanimously to move the scenarios forward into the supplemental environmental impact statement process. And so we talked a little bit about this last time, but really kind of that decision point is important for us because that actually allows us to get into the more formalized analysis around transportation and capital facilities like sewer, water, stormwater, land use, critical areas, parks and open space, all of those key components that are going to be important as we start to compare, how we want to move forward in terms of what a recommended future land use map will be, but also gives us some real information for how we can talk to the community about specific trade-offs for locations. So that decision by the City Council allows us to enter into that process. So as we're doing that, beginning in 2024, we will be looking at a no action alternative, which is essentially the alternative that keeps everything in place today. Nothing changes because we have to actually do that as a part of the EIS, and an action alternative. And those action alternatives will be all of those key growth areas within the growth scenarios. And so that allows us to really be able to compare and contrast specific locations within the city, how growth patterns occur and what those impacts are on transportation infrastructure and other elements of the EIS. Schedule-wise for that, so that's going to be happening in the early months of 2024, and we expect we'll be back to you when that's occurring. I'm starting to talk about policy elements, but that's really starting to be spring when we'll start to bring some of that information out to the community to talk about trade-offs. Ultimately, that gets us to a potential future land use map, which we'll be talking about in the summer and the fall. So this analysis we don't make any decisions out of this analysis. It just gives us the information to be able to make an informed decision down the road when we get into more refined work. So nice work with CAC. City Council was very happy with where this went and was appreciative of both Planning Commission and the CAC's work to get us there. Kate and Lance, you were there as well. And also we have a counselor here as well with us tonight. Any other input or additions, changes to that summary?
No, I think that covered it. I mean, we're at the point where all the real work begins,
Yeah,
all the analysis.
all the fun
So,
stuff's already happened. So now we're into it.
I think we were all just ready to keep moving forward. Alex, would you mind, spreading your agenda out so we can read it in the room here?
Yes, let me see if I can do that. And I'm actually going to switch over to a presentation pretty soon, but let me,
I
is that a
figured
little
you
better?
would. It's pretty small here in the room, so
Is that a little
at
better?
least from where I'm sitting.
All right. Any other discussion or summary from that, or summary of my summary? Does that sound about fair?
Yeah.
All right. All right. Well, even though I made the agenda big, I'm going to get rid of it now, and I'm going to do. I'm going to switch over to a presentation. Can y'all? Is that still shared? That's like. You see presentation on that, or are you still seeing the agenda?
the agenda.
Yeah, it's
All
not
right.
up.
Let me reshare. Okay. Is that
There
better?
we go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. Let me get set up here real quick. Sorry, the problem with multiple screens is that you have to organize them. Okay, so as I mentioned, we'll talk about the kind of major elements, draft plan framework and guiding principles. You should have a memo that was distributed to you middle of last week. So everything that we're going to talk about tonight is within that memorandum. Again, all of the discussion tonight is really to move forward both agreement or modifications to how we see the draft plan framework moving forward, but also the draft guiding principles to make sure that we have generally the right language there, or if we're missing language or we need to add stuff, this discussion tonight will help us start to think about that. And so let's step into those pieces. So let's talk about the draft framework. So before we get into 2024, I want to talk about kind of how the existing comprehensive plan is organized. In general, you have an introduction and project background. You have a vision statement that was developed as a part of that 2015 comprehensive plan. So that lays out the kind of the organization and the vision and goals, or excuse me, vision for the next 20 years. And then the other element, which this is where we see the most change actually within comparison between the 2015 plan and the 2044 plan, is that your existing 2015 plan is organized around 8 broad goals. And with those goals, you have over 200 policies underneath each of those goals. And so you have a policy framework chapter essentially that has those 8 goals with about 200 or so policies, a little bit more. And then some reflection of where those are within specific elements. So a checkbox of if it's land use or transportation or critical areas, those types of connection points. The challenge is that each policy is repeated then within your required elements. So you actually have your policy framework in 2 separate sections within the comprehensive plan. So those policies are actually repeated once you get back into land use and transportation. The challenge with that is that there's a couple different challenges with that. One is that if you make a change in one policy, it's easy to miss when you make a change in another policy. So sometimes you actually get edits that aren't made across documents. Sometimes too, you also get competing policies because you're starting to try and bridge too many different elements. And so what we've been thinking about and talking about with City and with others is how do you take, the policies and the work that's been completed as a part of the 2015 plan, bring those that are applicable forward into this 2044 plan with new policies and objectives incorporated specifically for housing and other elements that we have to amend, but make it more user-friendly, both from the city as well as for decision makers and also the community to make it more accessible. And so when we started to talk about, the plan as itself, we were asking ourselves and others who use the plan on a daily basis, what makes sense and what doesn't? What are specific organizational strategies that make it the easiest to be able to implement and accessible from the community? And so before I jump into the 2044 plan, Lance and Kate, you were, and Anita, you work with this every day. Did I characterize that correctly? Are there other considerations, just so that the advisory group knows kind of why we're thinking about changing the format of this comprehensive plan?
Sir, it's kind of going back to the future, or the future is going back to where we were before 2015. The way the document itself had been laid out is you were given all of the information about each element, and then at the end of that, it included the goals and policies associated. And with the way the plan is laid out right now, because we have to reference a lot of these goals and policies when we're approving a subdivision or a site plan, that it's consistent with the goals and policies of the plan. And the way it's laid out now, it literally could have the same policy, not only in the same chapter 3 places, but then it is also in the element itself. And so, as Alex was explaining, from a new person working with it, it is really not user friendly. And granted, that might also be because I'm old school. I like having the elements and all of the information up front, and then an explanation, or by element, you can have your goal and policies first and then all the background information. It's just a more concise way of providing the information. One of the things that we talked about is if the desire to have all of the goals and policies in one location is still desirable by all of our boards and commissions, we might do a summary at the end instead of at the beginning. Anita, any other comments on that?
I just agree with what Kate said. It's just easier to when we're doing projects and writing staff reports to reference that. It's easier to find. And yes, like Alex said too, a lot of them are repeated throughout the document. So it'd be nice if we got rid of that.
And so I think, as we, go ahead, sorry.
We have a question.
Yeah, I was wondering, was there a benefit to putting them all together, or a reason, like, is there understanding of the reason why they were put all together to start with?
Unfortunately, you are dealing with all new staff since that last plan was adopted. I don't know, Tony, were you were not on the council, were you involved? So do you know some of the decisions that were made for that?
Yeah, actually, I wasn't.
Nobody will claim responsibility.
I don't remember. I mean, that was 8 years ago, but
Yeah.
I do know that not just in this instance, but in all sorts of policies and procedures, we're always, the legislative committee, our policies review committee is always going through and like, let's make this streamline, let's clean this up, because it seems like when cities are given these huge tasks, come up with this comprehensive plan amendment, and then it takes days and weeks and months of these people who are volunteers reading it, rereading it, and so when they're finally done, it's great. They've done an amazing job. But then down the road, as you read through things, there's just revisions to kind of streamline things, so.
Okay, so
It's not just this, yeah, I've seen this multiple times in other.
Jay, do you have any, I know you were still new on planning
Yeah,
commission, but.
I don't necessarily think it would be productive to call Dave Osaki and ask him why it was done that way. I mean, we could, because we know him, we know where to find him. But I think if we have a better plan, we should just scrap the old plan and move to a more efficient plan. I mean, obviously, we could recreate why it was done that way. We just call Dave and ask him and he'll tell us, but if we have a better little widget, I think just move forward and everybody agree it's better, right? From a standpoint of readability from staff and anyone coming in to, a developer coming in to try and read it, right?
Yeah, I do think, I was just gonna say, streamlining could have been one of the reasons that was done, trying to collect everything in one place. The unfortunate part is the policy is literally in so many different places, the fear of missing it for amendments. I saw Tony had a question or a comment.
Just a question. One, I don't think we should spend a lot of time figuring out which one to do. Let's just do it and make the best of it. Second, does policy, any specific policy could appear in more than one element?
Absolutely.
And so we have to make sure, so that if we then only put the policies in the end of the elements, as we've done previously, then we have to make sure that each element where policy, that same policy is needed, is in each element.
Yeah, I think, and Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, but our intent right now is to go back to the, I guess it'd be the 2005 plan, where you don't actually have overlap, but you could summarize, you know, these goals and policies are identified in a specific element, but they could be impacted or implemented in other elements. So it's, we're trying to eliminate the confusion or,
Oh, good luck.
yeah.
You'll minimize the confusion, you'll not eliminate the confusion.
No, it's a big document. So this is, you know, for, I think, doesn't matter what size of community, this is the kind of key piece of how do you organize your policy framework. This is probably the potentially even more challenging than your future land use map. Our goal for this is to be able to provide clarity and consistency throughout the document. You know, as a, not specific examples, but one of the things that we noticed as we stepped through both the regulatory analysis and kind of reading each of the policies to see how they're worded and framed, there's some really great pieces in there, but some of your policies are actually worded more as actions or as goals. And so it's really just stepping through and kind of organizing and clarifying what statements you're trying to say. And so, you know, we'll be coming back to you with specific elements for this, but, you know, I think our goal, and Kate and Lance, Anita, correct if I'm wrong, our goal for this framework is that for each element, you'll have a series of goals underneath the element that will be element specific, you know, but may have some relationship to the others. So they'll have a home. They could have a home in land use or critical areas, but they may have some relation to those other sections that we would identify. But there would be a primary home for that, and so that's how the language would be written. So it's kind of thinking about it as a decision tree, almost, if you will, for how that works, and really providing clarity on, you know, what is a goal versus an action. So there's some good language in the comp plan now, but there's others that it's a little bit too nebulous about what it's trying to say. So trying to clean that up and make it put it in the right place. All right, any other questions on this? I know this is kind of a vague section, but we'll start to get into it more in just a moment for how this works. And Kate and Lance, help me in the room if somebody does raise their hand or they're.
Okay, we're good.
All right, thank you. So before I move out of the 2015 plan organization, you have 8 broad goals, which are sort of broad, but also sort of specific. Like you have a broad goal around housing and affordability, which, to be honest, probably should be a goal within a housing element. But then you have other goals that are a little bit more generalized. And I'm not going to show each of those goals today, but what we've thought about those 8 broad goals is probably the intent of what those goals would be provide overall broader direction to the plan itself, as opposed to being within the element. So we rethought that a bit, and that's really where those guiding principles come out. So I'm going to share those, then I want to talk about some of the language around that. But first I'll talk about the organization. So we still, in the comprehensive plan, 2015 or 2044, you still have your required elements, you know, land use, transportation, all of those. So we will have those like you have the comprehensive plan now. You'll have your introduction and background just like you do now. The difference is that rather than having a vision and then a series of goals, you'll have vision and guiding principles. And then the policy framework will fall underneath the elements. So rather than the policy framework sitting on top of the elements, it will actually fall underneath. And so the way that starts to work is that by calling them guiding principles as still as goals, it's more clear that it's giving you broad direction for the plan, not a specific element. This also allows you to start to think about within your policy framework, how you start to organize those objectives. What goal statements do you want to put in there that should be specific to that element, but then really starts to get you to a point where you can start to nail down in policies and actions kind of what that goal really means. And so it's more directive than what you have today, but it's also, I think it's a little bit easier to follow. So you have those broad vision statements, broad vision and principle statements, and then you have your elements with the policy framework underneath, as opposed to the policy framework up above the elements. So is that clear as mud, or is that it's a little more traditional to do it that way, but I think it's a little more clear and digestible.
We have a question in the room.
Yeah.
Oh, just a comment. I think it's clear, and I think it's a good idea to do that, where you separate the guiding principles before you get into the detailed goals and have those as like separate things. So you can just make that kind of not like a goal statement, but like a principle statement, and then later get into those action items.
Great. Yeah, it's actually one of the bigger moves within the comprehensive plan. I know it's just kind of moving a bullet on the slide here, just kind of pulling it down and changing some, but it's actually a pretty significant change for how the comprehensive plan is organized. Any other questions or comments on that?
We're good.
All right. So let's get into what this starts to mean. So I just want to show from a vision statement, we already have our vision statement, which is the Imagine Monroe vision statement. So that's what we're working with. That's what's been a part of our project since we began. We gathered input on this both through this community survey as well as the in-person events that we had. So we were able to actually tease out some wording and some language from that public engagement for ways to us to start thinking about what guiding principles might be. And when you look at from a lens of what a vision is versus principles, vision's your big broad statement. It's directing you. It's your North Star. The principles are really a specific element of that vision. So think about that as we step through the principles in just a moment, those key pieces that we've been pulling out of the vision to make sure we have it right. So I'll just read this real quick, just so we are all there. Imagine Monroe, a lively center surrounded by nature, a place of beauty and goodwill. Our parks, waterways, and environment are healthy and accessible for everyone to enjoy. Our historic downtown and business districts are thriving and full of locally owned businesses and locally sourced products. We can find everything we need with regional connections and a variety of choices for work, housing, dining, shops, arts, and activities. Friendly and responsive, we strengthen connections through gathering spaces, events, services, and community-centered infrastructure, creating a safe space for all. In Monroe, everyone feels at home and everyone feels they belong. That sound about right? Sound familiar? So that's our direction. You had a fair bit of community development or community input to get this. We had strong support from the community on our comprehensive plan elements. It's a good base for how we've been moving forward. We haven't made any changes to that. I just wanted to bring it out because that's our foundation. So with that, we took the 8 goals that were within the existing comprehensive plan. We looked at the Envision Monroe vision statement. We also looked at some of the existing work that's been going on within the city as a part, not necessarily as a part of the comprehensive plan, but as kind of a parallel track to how we move forward, but that really inform kind of this future policy development. Guiding principle number 1 is the equity statement that I know Planning Commission and I believe City Council as well has reviewed this. Kate and Lance.
Not council yet, just the Planning Commission.
Just
on the
Commission.
council's agenda for early January.
So Kate, I'm gonna put you on the spot in just a second, but
Sure.
the reason why we put this as guiding principle number 1 is that it is really interwoven within your vision statement. It is the natural progression for, how you would think about a city, kind of from an inclusivity standpoint, how you relate to one another, both, people coming in to do business and visit, but also residents and businesses. We felt it was a very important piece to put as a principle for the comprehensive plan. Kate, do you want to talk just a little bit about kind of the origin of this statement and, kind of where that's at within? I know there's Brandy and others are, sitting on the committee as well. I might also have some input, but maybe you could start.
Sure. Well, to begin with, there have been amendments to the Growth Management Act. The most specific, there are two, the House Bill 1220 in 2021, which was the first time that the state is actually giving the Department of Commerce regulatory authority over affordable housing. But another component for that was racial, displacement. And so it is now working towards racial equity is a term that we will be becoming very familiar with. But if you don't understand what equity means to your community, how do you move forward? The second layer of that was the Puget Sound Regional Council with Vision 2050. They have given us a lot of direction on how you are to better communicate with your entire community. There's also some land use guiding principles in there. And so because this is a significant change for our community, we felt it was valued the time to have a conversation on how should we define it for Monroe, because there is not a universal definition. There is one definition for some things at the federal level, at the state level, at PSRC, and Department of Commerce. And so that is really the origin of this going into equity, and then ensuring that we're implementing or working towards implementing Imagine Monroe. I think that is everything. The other two pieces with the equity statement, where we finished with the Planning Commission, is we actually have three components. One is a very short, succinct definition of equity. This was the origin for that definition, but the feedback we got from taking it to EDAB, CHSAB, there was a council committee, I'm forgetting.
Legislative.
Thank you. Yeah, was that it was too long, but there was still a desire to maintain it, and so it became a statement, because I think one of the committees had recommended it be a statement. And so that's how we got to this draft, which again has not gone to council, but it has been approved by or recommended approval by Planning Commission. Oh, got the third part. I'm sorry. So definition, equity statement, and then we also have screening questions that we'll use to look at all of the policies as we're moving forward. Again, it's trying to make sure, are we working towards Imagine Monroe? So that's the goal.
Great, thank you, Kate.
We got a question.
Yep.
Sorry to have so many
No, that's good.
instructions. In the guiding principles list of what they're, regardless of, not limited to these things, how is that list come up with?
How did
Started
we?
with,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
yeah,
Yeah,
I was gonna say, so we started with Puget Sound, well, actually, we started with Puget Sound Regional Council. I think there were 12 cities in there. There was some work that has been done by let's see, there's actually two items from Canada. And so it was a conglomeration of everything that I found available. And then we worked through a process of figuring out what we think is appropriate for Monroe. Then there was input from department heads, commissions, boards. I think that's everybody.
Did any of them include religion, and was there a reason why that wasn't included in the list?
There was a conversation, and
I don't recall the specifics of that.
that actually came up at Planning Commission. I do not recall, but I can look into it for you.
Can I comment really quickly?
Do you remember?
No, but at one point it was more broad. There was only like 5 categories. And adding the but not limited to was kind of the idea of just throwing in, some 5 first things. And then as some of the other boards saw it, they added a few more things. And so now it's teetering on that line. If you have too many things, you're being very precise. And if you have too few, you leave someone out. So that could still use some
some thought, but at this point, it sounds like all the input's already kind of gathered on that, but see, now we already left something out.
Yeah.
So,
It does seem to have a range of really broad things and then very specific things, like
this, yep, that's what, it was
All
broad
right.
first, and then some other committees added some specific things, yes.
So I think this one is a bit unique because it's going through its own separate process, with planning commission into city council. We put this into the comprehensive plan as a principle because it will, some form of it will likely become, part of, how the city does business, essentially, if you will, particularly on the land use planning side. So I think, the idea of this is really like, how do you implement Imagine Monroe with that? And so the narrative, I think what we would do is, these are all very draft. So whatever language, comes out, I think of the final planning commission city council process, we would, want to incorporate into the comprehensive plan. More broadly, I guess the question, for the committee, does it make sense to have this as a guiding principle within the comprehensive plan? That's, to us, I think it addresses directly some land use planning and other elements of it. But I think that's a broader question to the committee is this a good principle to have as a principle for the comprehensive plan?
Well, considering housing is such an important element, considering the history of fair housing, I would say yes.
Okay.
Considering all the legal documents that we inherit when we buy a house that says you can't sell to this group or that group, I would say yes.
Other
And
comments?
considering what's going on in the United States presently with the violence that revolves around a person's religion, you might want to conclude that specific statement.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree about including religion for sure.
Okay.
In fact, I like I said, I saw this in the legislative affairs committee. My question was why, like you said, Randy, the statement is, it's good for all, Monroe's good for all. And so we're trying to list all, but at some point, like, do you really need to list, like, I'm sure there's other ones that were,
shoe size.
you know what I mean? Like,
Are you making a personal comment about my shoe?
I struggle with what you said, Randy, I agree, because it's like, I wanna list everything, but I like just saying, it's all, everyone's welcome, no matter what. But that's my.
Thanks. James, you had.
But at EDAP, we had this conversation. And I had similar to what you said, Kevin, is all people. And then one of the responses was, you have to list it like this because it would affect our credit rating with Moody's, which was surprised to hear that we're directed to use that terminology because of our credit rating, which I was surprised to hear that.
To clarify the question, are you saying going
If you
to
just
the
said all, if you just said all,
okay,
it would affect, it could mentions it could affect our credit rating with Moody's.
thank you. You
Which was-
clarify what I need.
And so then again, you go on the road of, if you have to start listing them, there's another one here that you could add is political affiliation. I don't know if I'm being too nitpicky, but once you start listing them, then you gotta maybe go, maybe it should be, I don't know. I would love to keep myself personally, just keep it all, unless there's some, again, that Moody's thing I was really surprised to hear that out there.
All right, so I want to redirect just for a second, James. I want to get to you and as you see you have your hands up. So the question in front of the committee is not whether or not we should add a word to that, because that's going through its own process. Because we're not informing that process. If you do want a word there, talk to city council. My question is, should the equity statement in whatever final form it is be a part of the comprehensive plan? So that's I think the question that we need to get to. I appreciate the wordsmithing that folks are wanting to do here, but that there's another process that's happening along with that. Is that okay?
But Alex, can we just have maybe Kate or just describe how it got to planning commission and why it's at planning commission and why we need the equity statement for historic, disadvantaged,
Yeah.
real estate or that kind of
Yes, briefly, and then I want to get
That's
to
why-
James and Janelle, because we have 4 other statements.
That's
We
why
have
it
4
was
further
started.
statements I want to get through.
They'd have a fair shot
Yeah.
at the planning process, right?
So Jay is absolutely correct. Again, as I was stating, a lot of changes happened with the Growth Management Act. Very specifically, one in 2021, which was House Bill 1220, which directs all impact or affected GMA jurisdictions to look at housing, and it was very specific about racial equity. And one of the things we are charged with is to mitigate or work towards bettering the actions of the past that created displacement. And so to begin the conversation, what does equity mean? And equity from displacement, sorry, kind of all over the map here. There are certain groups in our community that were discriminated against, and that is why, that is the origin of this conversation. We are tasked with certain things from a racial equity, but that's also grown to economics, and this includes a lot more. I agreed, but that was the origin of the conversation. And then this year, the legislature passed another bill. It's actually under the guise of climate change, but it's now also talking about environmental justice, which also gets into racial equity. So the origin of this conversation was affordable housing, discrimination, and it really focused on the negative impacts that have happened to different racial groups in our in the United States.
Great.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm done.
James, you had your hand up. I want to get to you.
Oh, thank you. I agree that this is helpful being in the plan. I think it is appropriate to put here. And I definitely see the perspective on both sides about brevity versus, specificity. And I think kind of like she was just saying, this is kind of an acknowledgement of specific groups that have been marginalized. So
Great. Thanks, James. Janelle, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I actually agree with everyone in the group and James. I believe our equity statement, guiding principle number 1 should be included in the decision process. And I'd also like to know other guiding principles that you were going to share with the group.
That's what I'm trying to get to. Thank you. Peggy.
I will just very quickly add another voice of support to keeping this principle in the statement, because I think this is the type of thing that's better to have written down officially, rather than just sort of, an unspoken understanding. It helps to have everything laid out clearly as possible.
Great, thank you. So we'll track this as it goes through the other process, but I'm not hearing anybody say don't keep this in the plan. I think general feelings are that this should be maintained in its final, whatever its final language is. All right, is it okay to move on to the other principles? We have 4 more. Thank you, Janelle, for the prod. All right, so let's go to guiding principle 2. So in one of your 8 goals, there was a discussion about walkability. That was, I think, one of the biggest discussion points that we had throughout the public process early on in our process, in both in person and online, was just really from a development standpoint, we need walkable districts. We want walkable neighborhoods. When we talk to high school kids, they want to be able to access services, not by their parents. They want to be able to walk and bike and take transit. This guiding principle gets to that walkable and active element. So Monroe is a community with walkable neighborhoods, parks, and community hubs where people can live and work close to the daily services they need. We support our local businesses downtown and elsewhere, and desire to create new neighborhood hubs of activity that meet daily needs within walking distance from our homes and businesses. So it gets to that connectivity, but also kind of the walkable districts that we heard loud and clear from the community. How's that sound?
Sounds great to me.
Yeah.
I love it.
Any heartburn at all?
Elsewhere. Why not throughout the city? It's just kind of like
downtown and elsewhere.
Yeah,
Thank
elsewhere. Just all the other places around Monroe. I think it should just, I feel like it's
everywhere in the city.
Yeah.
Thank you. So broad, more broadly. Thank you. Peggy.
Hello again. I may be getting into the danger zone of terminology here, but walkable could be read as exclusionary toward people who can't walk or are using a wheelchair, have some
Thank
sort
you.
of, mobility issue. And I think that would be worth addressing in future iterations.
That is a great catch, Peggy. I really appreciate that. So we will make that change. Accessible is a much more, much better term.
Or easily, short distance from one thing to another. Yeah.
Go Peggy.
Yeah.
Yay!
Well,
You could
and
take
so,
a,
oh, go ahead.
you could take an and/or accessible, just because walkable, I think is it's an important part of accessible that isn't, I think, doesn't quite capture walkable, or important part of walkable that I don't think is quite captured by accessible. So you could do like an and/or type of thing.
Okay. Yeah, we can work on that language.
Great, if I have a comment in here, yeah, we have to be, at some point, you have to define what you mean by accessible as walkable. And however that does incorporate, people that maybe can't walk, but, that's a huge step for Monroe, is this walkable stuff, and we can't get away with just saying, connected or accessible, because to Monroe, that means driving.
Yeah. Yeah, and I want to say every person we talked to, this was something that came up in some fashion. So good. So that's, I think, what we can, massage the language here. I think the goal for tonight is make sure we're generally on the right track. But it sounds like people like this.
Yeah.
Let's keep it. All right. Let's move on to 3. Okay. So guiding principle 3 is safe and accessible. So there was some goals in the 2015 plan about community safety and some other elements. This somewhat gets to an accessibility piece, but with the comments we just had for guiding principle 2, we might want to massage this language a little bit, but let me read it real quick. So guiding principle 3, safe and accessible. Monroe is a family-friendly, diverse community where everyone feels safe, welcome and safe. That's straight out of Envision Monroe, that line, or close to it. We believe that all residents should have access to safe, dependable, and efficient multimodal transportation options and community services such as parks, schools, police, and fire services, and located in central areas that serve the broad community. I might have one extra and there that I should probably remove, but essentially it's like your nearby services. This is not necessarily about kind of shopping per se. This is like parks and open space, being able to get around, being able to walk to your school, and also being served by community facilities. So this is kind of the basic needs guiding principle that everybody should have those within the city.
Just a comment, just seeing that guiding principle 3 has, like, specifies that accessibility, and the comments about the walkability needing to be actually stated. I think that it's good the way it is.
Okay.
I don't know if there's wordsmithing required.
Janelle.
I would just add visitors as well as residents.
Okay, thank you. James?
I don't want to open a can of worms, but one aspect that you might take note of is healthcare, because we do have a local public hospital, and that it just might be one kind of domain of public safety to think about.
Well, and that's part of access to services, right? So adding healthcare there seems reasonable.
I should say, as I say that, because I've had conversations with the city about this, is one of the reasons why I don't know if it's there right now is because the comprehensive plan covers police and fire and also all the housing stuff, but it actually doesn't cover hospital healthcare type stuff. So it might just be a dynamic of the comprehensive plan.
Well, and it could be, there's a couple different ways to look at this principle, and that's why these are broad, kind of statements for the plan itself. It could be access to those services. Just because the comprehensive plan doesn't have healthcare, goals and policies per se, access to those services could be a part of the transportation element, for example. But James, thank you for that. All right, sounds like, so we had a lot of discussion on 1 and 2. It feels like we're moving forward. So 2 and 3 are those sound pretty good? All right, let's look at 4 and 5. All right, guiding principle 4, local and community driven. Monroe is a resilient community of local businesses, arts, culture, and outdoor activities. We believe that all residents should have the opportunity to grow and flourish in Monroe. We value the lifestyle Monroe offers and celebrate many cultures. We support our local businesses and are active participants in community events and cultural activities. We take advantage of the outdoor activities in our parks and natural areas and are stewards of the environment. So this is that kind of who we are with Monroe. It's the bridge between business and environment, between community and commercial. It's really kind of that. It's kind of the culture of Monroe within this principle. There's a lot in this one in particular, so I'm curious what y'all think. Brandy, I think I see your hand up on the owl.
Yeah, I really like it. The one piece that I think Imagine Monroe talks about that this doesn't quite is that as a community, we take care of each other as well. So it talks a lot about supporting local businesses and participating in events, but finding a way to add in the part about taking care of other community members.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Other comments on this one?
Tony's got one.
Oh,
We have our local business and our active participants in community events and cultural activities. As I said here, I would say political activities too. Or political processes
okay.
that we expect our citizens to be in part of the political process and influence the decisions. Yeah. Yeah, might even show up at city council once in a while.
Tony, do you think so? Political. I want to test a word with you. So political, that can be loaded sometimes. What about civically active, or what about something like that?
Yep, that'd be fine.
No, I like that ad. I just
Yeah, no, civic would be fine.
Okay, James.
It gets what I'm trying to communicate.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually really appreciate Tony's point. There's so much stigma around being the word political. So I think civic is a wise kind of word to use, but I think the idea behind it is really important. Like we all need to be more involved. So I think it's really helpful to put in the guiding principle. I was going to add that just grammatically, Monroe is a resilient community. I think I would personally like to see a community of people who are basically acknowledging, number one, we're a community of people, and then these are all the things about us.
Yeah,
I'm not sure grammatically if that sentence quite is correct on that level, but
you may be right. So let us go back and work on that a little bit. But I like that out of a community of people that supports, or that local businesses or arts, or we can certainly work on that. James, does the intent of this one, does it work for you though?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Okay. I love it.
Cool. Any other comments on this one? All right, so we have one more, then we'll talk just a little bit about next steps on this, and then I will turn it over to Anita afterwards. So the last one is about affordable and diverse housing opportunities. It's really the nut of kind of what we're doing. The fact that people need to be able to afford a home, or not even a home, a place to live within Monroe. So guiding principle 5. Affordable and diverse housing opportunities. Monroe is a diverse community with a wide range of incomes and housing needs. Our housing stock is varied, with many options throughout the community to suit income, age, and family size. Housing needs often change over time, and whether you are a young graduate looking for your first apartment, a family wanting a house and a yard, or retiree downsizing, there are attainable options in Monroe. Everyone has an affordable place. That probably should be an affordable place to live. Edit myself as I'm reading it. James.
This is the one that that caught my eye when I was reviewing the agenda. And maybe if I just give you an alternative reading. Let's see here. So whether you are, say, a high school dropout or an immigrant family living in the same house as 2 or 3 other families, or someone who is homeless. So I guess and what I should have said before I'm making this point is that I am so proud of all of the work that has gone into these principles and this vision statement. And so this, I think, is just kind of like the crooked tile on the wall. I think it could be easily fixed, but I think we should definitely rephrase this one because I think it makes it seem like you have to be going to college or, you know, having a retirement plan to have a place.
No, that's a great statement. And so it's the way it's written, it's not super inclusive now for people's experience or, you know, kind of ability, you know, whether, so we can certainly work on that. James, thank you for pointing that out. Janelle.
Thank you so much, James, for saying that, because I was so confused going, do you have to be just graduated and you can't just not be a dropout and invest your money and buy your own house and start an entrepreneurship? And so that really kind of was like, whoa, very specific.
Well, and you know, to be honest, I wrote this and it probably showed my educational bias. So Janelle and James, I appreciate you pointing that out. That's an easy change.
And I want to say again that I think that I'm really proud of what I'm seeing here. I think this whole community should really be proud of all of that. And like I said, I think that this last one, I think, like I said, I think it's a easy default to kind of think of in terms of, especially where it says community to suit income, age, and family size. That part too, I think we can maybe rethink about that, because family size actually even kind of implies a specific nuclear family. Income implies you have income, you know, all that kind of thing. And I know it's partly because if you're looking at the items that we're working through in terms of the categories of the things that the comprehensive plan is looking at, I think that's kind of where it comes from. But as a guiding principle, I think we can make it a little bit more visionary, if you will.
Yeah.
If that's a good word for it.
No, those are great comments. Let me step back just a moment and we can come back into it. So the idea around this principle is that there is a place, you know, for everyone within Monroe, regardless of you know, income or ability or type of housing need, because, you know, that principle itself is a good principle. I'm hearing the language that we have in here is what needs work on kind of how we characterize that. Is that correct? Okay.
Like you said, Alex, massaging the verbiage.
That's why we have you, because it helps us kind of clean this stuff up. So
thank you.
Any other comments or suggestions on this one?
I have one more comment. I agree with their comments, but I do think the specificity of having some examples is helpful, because we hear language all the time about affordable housing and that there's a you know, a place for everybody. But the way that you did make it very clear and specific, and you can visualize these different options more than having it be a really vague statement. So my feedback is I liked how you were being specific, but I guess just a little bit different wording with it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And so I think we can take, there's a specific demographic, I think, that is kind of, there's an undertone of a certain demographic within this current principle. I think trying to clean that up and make it a little bit more inclusive, I think, is what I'm hearing as the kind of, you know, revision. Okay, so those are the 5 principles. So I want to just kind of review quickly. So, you know, these are what we'll take through is we'll make these changes. These are great edits. We'll get these back out to you as a red line so you can see the changes that we've made. We'll as this starts to come through, we'll make these edits. This will become essentially that first kind of couple chapters of the comprehensive plan. So this will be tied to the Imagine Monroe vision. These will be the things that start to hang off of the vision that set the tone for all the elements that we're going to work on in 2024. Overall, it sounds like we're on the right track. We obviously have to make some language changes here. Is there anything, you know, then you were reading these that we were missing that you felt weren't captured in some fashion in the principles? it's okay if we, if we did miss it. We like to keep them not more than, a handful, just so that they're manageable, because we do get into more detail in the goals and the elements. But is there anything, just kind of, when you read it, you said, hey, we don't have, we're missing this?
Is there a way we can get the Imagine Monroe up on one screen and this just to go, or maybe just look at Imagine Monroe one last time and,
Sure. Let me see if I can pull that up here. Oh, sorry. Tried to be creative and didn't go. I'll pop it back. There you go. How's that feel in reviewing the vision statement again? Okay. We have time. So, if something pops up, after the meeting, or, something comes to mind, again, these are all within the packet that you have. Feel free to reach out to Kate or myself. We can certainly, talk about that and redline this. We're just starting to create the document. So, this is the time when we want to start to get these nailed down. But overall, it sounds like we're on the right track. So, all right. So with that, is it okay to switch over to Anita to talk about middle housing? All right, Anita, the show is yours. Stop sharing.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's really good to see you. Great discussion so far. I'm going to share my screen. I do have a PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay. So tonight I'll be presenting and leading the discussion on middle housing. And as we know, in Washington State, we are currently going through a housing crisis. In every city, every county, across the state. So we really have to come together and think of some alternative options to create more housing. So middle housing, it means buildings that are compatible in scale, form, and character with single-family houses and contain 2 or more attached, stacked, or clustered homes, including duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, fiveplexes, sixplexes, townhomes, stacked flats, courtyard apartments, and cottage housing. So when we're talking about affordable housing options, we're talking about other things than your typical single family home, or on the other side of it, big multifamily apartment buildings. So we're looking at something in between. So also when we talk about affordable, or how we like to frame it, attainable housing, we're looking at housing that is not more than 30% of our income. So this is just some examples of the different housing types I described earlier, middle housing. So, and as we stated before, you want this to fit into the existing neighborhoods, to look more like they are single family homes, but are more accommodating and have more units. So we have things like duplexes, triplex, fourplex, townhome development here. And then we have the 5plex, 6plex, some courtyard apartments, and also cottage housing. There's also an example of some stacked flats here. So I'll be talking about some new state regulations, talking about the Housing Action Plan that was adopted in 2021. We'll look at some policy considerations that came out of the Housing Action Plan, and development code implementation. So just discuss a couple of new state regulations, a couple House bills that came out this year. So we have House Bill 1110, that this is referred to as the Middle Housing Bill. This requires cities of certain sizes and locations to allow multi-dwelling units per lot in a middle housing type of form. So Monroe is not required to implement House Bill 1110. We don't fit the criteria that is required of all the other jurisdictions, but we have been working on middle housing for a couple of years now. We did receive a middle housing grant to start that work in 2021. And I think it's very important because, you know, as we talk about attainable housing, we need to update our codes, update the comprehensive plan to create some policies that will allow developers to come in and provide more middle housing for the community. There's also House Bill 1337 regarding accessory dwelling units that was passed in 2023. The intent of this House bill is to further ADU construction and increase the variety of housing types and housing options. It requires local governments to update comprehensive plan policies and regulations within 6 months after the due date of their next GMA periodic update. So for us, this would be required after the December 2024 comprehensive plan deadline. So 6 months after that, we have to update our ADU code. So luckily, we are already starting that process, and so we will bring in that forth to the Planning Commission next year, and hopefully we'll get that passed before the deadline. Housing Action Plan adopted by Council in June 2021. Some of you may be familiar with this plan on Planning Commission or the CHSAB board or a council. And I did include the link in the slide, but the HAP is also included in the packet. Not sure if you were able to read through that document before this meeting. The HAP does establish housing strategies and policy considerations as well as an implementation plan. So I just wanted to quickly go over some of those strategies and policy considerations so that when we had that discussion later on in this presentation that we can take some of those into consideration. So the first strategy of the HAP is zoning regulations. And so this is basically changing, amending, updating the zoning code to allow more middle housing in the city, or creating opportunities for more housing options. The second strategy was middle income housing or middle housing. This section covers options to meet the needs of middle income housing. So we included things like ADUs and duplexes and cottage housing and all those other forms of middle housing. So some of the policy considerations that we came up with was fast tracking new ADU permits. So doing that by offering pre-approved plans to homeowners. Streamlining the ADU permitting process by changing the type of land use permit from a type 2 to a type 1, therefore not needing the noticing requirement and making the process a little faster. Looking at amending the current ADU code, which we will be doing next year, and then actively promoting ADUs as an option for multi-generational housing. Strategy number 3 is expanding the supply of attainable housing for low-wage workers or workforce housing. And some of the policy considerations that came out of this was allowing microhousing or small efficiency dwelling units in multifamily zones, mixed use zones, and commercial zones. Creating standards. Oh, yes.
Jump in. Are we looking, is there a slide with policy that you're showing, or were you moving?
Oh, I'm just kind of reading through the HAP. Okay. If you wanted to follow along, you can do that.
Okay, great. Well. Thank you. Just want to make sure.
Yeah. And then creating standards and regulations that make microhousing or small efficiency dwelling units feasible and attractive to developers. So some of the ideas we had was to look at existing commercial buildings that are maybe vacant, and possibly creating residential units inside those buildings. So kind of doing that microhousing kind of apartment dwelling units. Strategy 4 was minimizing displacement. So displacement occurs when a city grows and needs to make room for new residents, usually achieved through redevelopment or infill development. And as a result, older housing units are demolished, resulting in residents moving someplace less desirable. So there's 3 types of displacement. There's physical displacement, economic, and cultural. Some policy considerations are to create a rental registration program to track and available units in the city and rental costs, partner with affordable housing providers and services, Join the Alliance for Affordable Housing, or AHA, which we have already done. Create a list of available public lands and explore the possibility of land donation to affordable housing developers, and support or partner with Community Land Trust or CLTs, and consider dedicating city-owned lands to CLTs. The next strategy was strategy number 5, which is multifamily development incentives, or MFTE. And so we are already starting work on that. Will be completed or started and hopefully completed next year. And then strategy number 5, this was a really great idea that all the groups that we worked with came up with, and it's the master plan communities. So a master plan community, or MPC, is a large scale residential development located in urban or suburban areas and includes a variety of housing options and styles and recreation amenities, such as tennis courts, community centers, parks, playgrounds, and sometimes commercial uses. Some of the policy considerations for this strategy, we're considering rezoning the school district property to allow a master plan community, consider other publicly owned land and rezone to allow master plan communities, allow master plan communities under development agreements, and to draft MPC code section. And then the last strategy was housing for special needs groups. And this was a goal to develop and implement equitable community solutions to housing needs. So it is important to recognize that there are special needs groups that are also in need of affordable housing. So some groups to consider are seniors, disabled residents, and people experiencing homelessness. Some policy considerations are engaging with affordable senior housing proponents and developers on how to make developing these types of units in the city more feasible, adding housing choices for seniors and disabled residents, explore innovative and low-cost housing solutions to serve people experiencing homelessness. So those are all the strategies from the HAP, along with the policy considerations. There's also an implementation plan at the end of the document. And so, as I stated before, we've already done some of these implementation tools. We are going to bring this into our work with the comprehensive plan, with updating the land use and housing policies. So that is the work we're actually doing right now. So I'll go back to my presentation. Let's see. So when we're looking at policy considerations, so I did read you some that we came up with from the HAP. We also need to consider displacement, racially disparate impacts, and as Kate alluded before, House Bill 1220, which was passed in 2021, which amended the Growth Management Act to instruct local governments to plan for and accommodate housing affordable to all income levels. So we did have a joint planning commission CHSAD meeting where we had Dave Osaki from Commerce come and talk about racially disparate impacts. If you did miss that presentation, I do have a slide deck that he provided that I can email to you, so just let me know. So just for those that are not familiar with racially disparate impacts, or RDIs, those are when policy, practices, rules, or other systems result in a disappropriate impact on on one or more racial group. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about RDIs. So when we're talking about planning for and accommodating housing affordable to all income levels, now we have to look at all income levels. So moderate, low, very low, and extremely low income levels, as well as emergency housing and permanent supportive housing. So this is going to be very important as this is a new requirement of the state. So this is something we're going to be working on for those policy considerations. Another step in the process after the policies are established in the comprehensive plan is implementation. So implementation is done through our development code. So the development or zoning code is the most important tool a city has in implementing the goals and policies of the comprehensive plan. So once those policies are established, we'll begin working on the following code sections. And like I said before, we're already starting to work on these. So by the time all the work is done, we'll be on top of it. So We need to update the affordable housing code section, which will include the multifamily tax exemption, and then also working on a code for middle housing. So, and just speak about middle housing again. So we did receive that grant to work on middle housing. So we do have a draft code. And then the state commerce just actually came out with a model ordinance on middle housing as well. So I'll be looking at those codes, seeing what's most relevant to the city of Monroe, combining those codes. Then I'll bring those back to Planning Commission and to the other boards and commissions starting next year. So here are some questions for the CAC. As Alex stated before, we're not actively creating or deciding on what policies, land use and housing policies today. But I do have some questions because I would like to start the discussion on anything that's coming to mind, any policies from the HAP that you would like to see expanded, any new policies that you've been thinking about during this meeting or any other meetings that we've had. So the first question I have for you is, what do you think are the biggest issues with housing today and in the future for Monroe? Second question, how should the comprehensive plan address housing needs and type? And then another question is, what are some policy options? Here are a couple prompts that we could look at. You know, do you want to preserve existing affordable housing? How do we want to increase affordable housing production? And then how are we going to ensure the benefits of investment and development are equitably distributed? So yeah, I would just, I'd welcome your comments. And if anyone wanted to start the discussion, I'm going to be taking notes because yeah, this is, I'm really passionate about middle housing and starting to do this work in the city.
Thanks, Anita. So
before, Alex, just before we begin the conversation, there are 2 points that I do want to clarify. The housing action plan talked about the school district property. I do want to be clear that is not in any of the land use scenarios that we are considering this year. After a meeting with the school district, it is remaining institutional. So if the school district at some future date wants to look at different options, that would have to go through a separate process, but it is not on the table for this round of updates. The second piece.
This applies to the old football field.
That is correct.
Because the administration building is already zoned for multi-use. And I believe where the old Frank Wagner Middle School is actually also zoned for other use too.
So all properties that are adjacent to North Kelsey, right? It's North Kelsey on both sides of the road.
Right.
Is institutional.
Yes.
And it will remain institutional.
I'm talking about where the old Frank Wagner Middle School is, where the auditorium is, that building.
That is downtown commercial. You are correct. It's already different.
Thank you.
The second piece I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention is that the city council actually was a participant in coming up with some of the income-based housing allocations. So one of the requirements is that Snohomish County through Snohomish County Tomorrow adopts these allocations for the city of Monroe. That's our population allocation, our employment allocation, and housing. And because of House Bill 1220, earlier this year, I had taken information to our council on Snohomish County has come up with 3 different alternatives on how we come up with the distribution of housing by income level. That was actually adopted by the Snohomish County Council earlier this year. And so when we get into the comprehensive plan, it will actually show a number by average, medium income, because that's the breakout. So I just want to let you know, there's some pieces that have already been done and there are some pieces that are off the table as we begin this conversation.
No, great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. Appreciate that. So we have about half hour or so. And, as before we kind of jump into the conversation, first of all, thank you, Anita, for stepping through that. As I mentioned at the intro to the meeting, housing is probably the biggest element that's new. I mean, housing element is not new itself, but the changes to the housing element are some of the biggest changes that have come around with this round with the comprehensive plan. So, as we start to get into the policy work, the current policies within the comprehensive plan are most likely not going to be adequate to be able to address both middle housing, but also racially disparate impacts related to housing. And so, when we think about the biggest housing issues today into the future for Monroe, that first question, actually, James, I kind of want to put you on the spot because we talked about that policy or principle 5 for the housing pieces. And I think you very rightly said that, when we start to think about housing, how we have our statements, who it's for and what that means, it carries a lot of weight. And so I wanted to maybe just kind of pick on you a little bit to see kind of, what your thoughts are to that first question, like kind of key housing issues and elements that, that we need to address through a policy language.
I think it's displacement because we have this fixed space and we have this expectation to accommodate increased growth. And we have a vulnerable population on the south side of the city that is ripe for displacement. And that's most of where our marginalized communities are. And so we got to figure out how do we protect those communities. And so what I would suggest as a broad idea is that while we do have a housing crisis, I think what's fundamental is we have a community breakdown crisis. We have lots of houses that are being rented out for short-term rentals. We have people who are on the streets because they don't have a good relationship with their family. Maybe it's because of severe mental illness or addiction. They could be in a house, but they can't because of social dynamics. And so how do we foster a healthier community of people? And that will, I think, translate into improved conditions for our housing. So specifically what I would suggest is, among many things, is considering zoning or city ordinance type language that will support community land trusts. And while land trusts can't be the end all, they will never be for everyone. I think specifically I would encourage, I'm trying to find, there's a city that partnered, and basically the tool is you encourage a developer to partner with the CLT, a community land trust, and you give that developer a density bonus. You say, you have space for 10, I'll give you 11, but the 11th one goes to the CLT. You don't get as much out of it, but in the end, you get more than you would have. And the city gets a CLT house, which can be extremely low income. Well, not extremely low income, but very low income. And it's permanently affordable. That house, that 11th house, will be affordable for 199 years per the land trust model.
Thank you. Other thoughts or comments on that question? And James, thank you for jumping in kind of the policy considerations, how we start to phrase and word that. That's the next iteration of this. I appreciate kind of thinking critically about that. Other comments or thoughts about housing today, and if there are policy issues you've been thinking about that we need to start considering as we get into the policy framework.
Tony.
Well, this plan is for 2044. The city owns land that they hope to develop for housing. So as they get the agreement with Lowe's straightened out. But by 2044, I have faith they'll get that part straightened out. Is that the city makes a condition that when they sell land for housing, that 20% of it is for affordable housing. That is for people making less than 60% of median income. That would be something really tangible. Now, and the city might have owned other pieces of land. Like I said, I realize presently the city cannot develop it for housing, but they've been working on it for a couple of years, and I have faith by 2044 that it'll be possible.
No,
you might be around city council still, huh?
Well,
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to curse you.
And Tony, that's a model that, for example, some transit agencies are using, like Sound Transit, TriMet, in the Portland metro area, parcels that they own adjacent to transit, they're not, some of them are market rate, but a high percentage are being directed to be affordable in some fashion. So if you own the land, you can control what happens with that in a lot of ways.
And considering, I support the multifamily tax exemption. It's always been difficulty to provide housing for those who make less than 35% of median income. Usually it's always been public subsidies. But in the past, you know, people who made from 40 to 80% of median income, many times the private sector could provide housing. But that has changed dramatically. It's very rarely that you find private sector providing housing for those who make 60% of median income, or even 80%. So I think that's the biggest challenge of the future. Is creating housing for the 60 to 80% of median income where there's usually no federal subsidies and such. And so I think that is where many of our encouragement of private developers getting density bonuses for providing affordable housing is necessary.
Great. Thank you. Other comments, thoughts?
So I heard Anita, is it okay to talk now?
Yeah.
I heard Anita mention about maybe using vacant commercial space for housing. And that got me thinking a little bit, in our Imagine Monroe, we say variety of choices for work. And kind of, maybe I'm going back a little bit too far, but then we mentioned nowhere in the guiding principles about employment opportunities. And so if we take housing and our commercial space and don't put more more businesses in there and put housing in there, then we have to become a bedroom community again. So it seems to me we need more focus on employment in town, so they don't have to travel to Everett or to, and I'm not sure if I'm talking out of turn here, but I worry about not thinking about jobs here in town.
No, so making sure there's, back to the principles, that there's a balance there between housing and employment.
Yeah. Because it was mentioned certainly in the vision of 2015, it was mentioned, if I got it right. It was goal 3 is it did a really good job of mentioning the issue of providing employment opportunities. And then it seemed like it's not mentioned at all in the guiding principles of the 2044 plan.
Okay.
So maybe
we can take a look at that. Thank you. I want to get to, so some of the pieces, actually first, before we jump to that, are other thoughts or comments kind of on the existing housing stock, kind of, direction, policy considerations. There's been some good ideas just, thrown about tonight already. Other considerations, and if you don't have to have a policy statement formed, but if you have kind of thoughts or ideas, that's, we can certainly develop that, but kind of anything else out there that we should think about?
I do. So on what are some of the issues, whatever question 1 was, I feel like there is not a lot of varied options like we keep saying that we want. So there's some apartments, a lot of them you have to qualify for, and then there's like new builds that are all really expensive. And smaller lots, smaller houses, smaller apartments for that's for a lower income, but it's also for people who don't want or need that much space. We currently don't have a lot of options that are varied in space requirements, size for people. So that's one of my concerns. Another one is a lot of the redevelopment that we look for. Not only does it displace residents, but also character of neighborhoods get changed and then all of a sudden we don't have that option anymore. You now don't have 4 small houses in a row on Main Street because they got developed into 4 fourplexes. So again, then we accidentally eliminate a varied type of house that we did have. So managing the protections of what we already have and we want to keep, while still bringing in some of these newer ideas that we know we need and want. One of the cool, I like strategy 6 for the master plan communities, but not thinking of it as this one new community, but thinking of it as within all of Monroe. If we thought of it as a master plan community and we made sure that we had some small apartments, some senior apartments, some open space, retail, all these things within walking for everybody, instead of hoping we can find some land that some lucky people will get to live in this master plan community. Instead, all of our residents should live in a master planned community.
Brandy, so I think, yeah, making sure, if I'm understanding you right, making sure that we have a diverse types and sizes of housing. So it's not just about, it's about, studio to 3 bedroom. Some families are big, are large. So, but it's the scale, but it's also at price points. And, in addition to some of the other elements.
Yeah, and just one other example would be like, sometimes we'll say, let's redevelop the Strawberry Lane neighborhood, for instance, because they all have really big yards. So let's make sure that everybody there gets a lot denser. Well, then what happens is that whole neighborhood that had big yards is now gone. So then we're missing that part of the market. Nobody will be able to buy a house like that again. So when we talk about, it's a displacement of neighborhood feelings. Like we accidentally change a neighborhood because we allow a fourplex in an old historic neighborhood, and that doesn't belong there.
Okay, thank you. Tony.
Yeah, well, that's just sort of me to think about. Strawberry neighborhood has large yards because it's all on septic.
Right.
And we zone it for high density, thinking that it's gonna be developed, but you would have to bring in a major sewer line, and we know that it's very expensive. So we say it's gonna go greater density, but on septic, it's not gonna happen. And the city's not gonna pay for a sewer line extension. So that's one. Two, we always talk about ADUs. And then I look at all the new development on the North Hill, and there's no room on those lots for ADUs. So, we always say that ADU is gonna be our savior for diverse housing, and yet, in the North Hill, where all the new development is land, housing is being developed that won't allow ADUs on them. So as everybody knows, interest rates has gone up. And I was reading an article recently, the reaction for developers of single family homes to higher interest rates is to build smaller homes. And because the small home is less expensive to compensate for the higher interest rate. You used to build a house for $750,000 at a lower interest rate. Well, now with the higher interest rates, you build a house at $600,000. And so sometimes I wonder, maybe we should have, if it's possible in this state even, restricting the size of houses.
I brought that up at the last planning commission meeting. If we could avoid some displacement if we could restrict the size of, in certain areas, restrict the size of new homes to 1,100 to 1,500 square feet, then they wouldn't be buying the older homes in downtown, south of downtown. There's just no inventory, no builders building that.
When I moved here in 1995, the apartments were being developed. And there were many single story housing that were 1,200 square feet. They were known as starter homes. Back then, it was like, $120,000, $115,000 homes, where the 1,500 larger homes was going for $144,000 and such. But anyway, allowing developments to take up the whole lot means that you can't build ADUs. Two, if there was a way we could restrict the size of housing to some extent, then you bring the cost of the actual building of the house, because it's less material, less labor to build a house. And maybe that's what's needed. I don't know if that's allowed, state law. And again, when we zone multifamily housing in an area that's all septic, like Strawberry neighborhood, I think it's unrealistic for it to be developed for multifamily, because the expense of bringing in a sewer line for that whole neighborhood. There's no sewer lines even close to it's at the hospital.
Thank you, Tony. So I want to bring James in the conversation. I want to get back to your question on scale of homes in just a moment, but James, you had your hand up, so I want to give you the floor.
Okay, yeah. I do like that idea about restricting, at least in certain areas, the size of a home. One side benefit of that is, if you think in terms of climate, smaller homes are more efficient to heat. We have a lot of people have larger homes than they need, and that's one positive thing. And then I just wanted to mention, I was trying to find the city that partnered with a CLT and a developer. So it was the city of Renton. And if anybody's interested in looking at it, it's called the Willow Crest Townhomes. I'd encourage people to check that out. It was basically the city put a little cash towards it, helped facilitate the zoning. A developer came in and built the homes, got a density bonus, but then some of the units were provided to CLT. But there's some education that has to happen for developers to understand how CLTs work. So I just really encourage people to look into the CLT option. I think it's a really good adjunct or kind of extra thing that can be added to the community that is really valuable.
Well, that's great. Thank you. And thank you for the example. That's awesome. We can definitely take a look at that. So Tony, I want to get to your question, but I want to broaden it just a little bit. So Anita, you were talking, through some of the housing action plan and some of the policies around ADU and middle housing in general. Part of, some of the alternatives that we showed you, at the last meeting was thinking about for your detached, residential areas, your, SR4, SR7, some of those other areas, making those a little bit more opportunity for different housing types in there. And so, Tony, your first point about like smaller housing, you can do that by, just naturally restricting the size of the lot. You can only put so large of a house on it. So I want to test that with the group. You can restrict that by size and by parcel size. But more broadly, when we start to look at some of the existing detached residential areas, are we going far enough if we just say, ADUs and duplex? Do we need to think about fourplex, townhomes, other policy direction that starts to open up some of those, kind of traditional housing types, if you will? That's a big question, I know. But that's a policy question that we're going to have to start thinking about. And Anita and Kate, if I mischaracterize that, feel free to jump in. So.
Well, I guess that goes to my point, which is some neighborhoods, if you start allowing fourplexes in a neighborhood, there would, and I know we don't want to get into like having review boards that review what the new build looks like and all that, but finding some kind of a way to make it so it looks and feels like it belongs in that neighborhood.
Yeah, there's a lot of great examples of, 3 and 4plexes that look like houses, look like regular houses. They might have a door on one side and a door on the other side, if they're a corner lot but yeah, Brandy, to your point, kind of context sensitive design for.
Because what we're used to seeing here is developers just build everything as big and as to the edge of all their property lines as possible so they can get the max profit, and it looks out of place in neighborhoods.
Yeah, fair enough.
As far as your comment about restricting the lot size or the parcel size, and then what Brandy was saying about building all the way to the edges, I think it's important to more specifically restrict the building size instead of the lot. And they can maybe choose to subdivide it as they see fit for the size that they're allowed to build.
Yeah. Other thoughts?
Just in terms of like the whole housing requirements that a city has, like, I don't have a lot of knowledge on all of this. And it seems like, from what I understand, the state has requirements for the city to provide certain amounts of housing. Is that accurate?
We have an allocation that we are trying to achieve. Yes.
Okay. And so, yeah, that's kind of tricky to find like a way to add that housing that we need without disrupting, certain aspects that we want to maintain. And I can see how a lot of it would come from, limiting or creating policies for anything new that's coming up. what Tony was saying about the lack of space on a lot of the properties for the accessory dwelling units is very relevant for the new builds, but also for like the huge community of the Frylands. There's not a lot of extra space on those properties either. So all the examples of middle housing are like great ideas for adding more housing units. One thing that came to mind with like the idea of small homes being more efficient, and that comment was there's a trend towards tiny homes. And so this is kind of just going who knows where with ideas, but like potentially we could move into a direction, or this could be a thing in the future or whatever, that like maybe in the way that there's like RV parking, it would be like more long-term than that, but like people could have like a lot where they could have a tiny home and live there for, you know, 3 to 5 years or something, and it could be something that can be moved. Or maybe we could just have a place where there's, you know, lots of tiny homes where people might choose to live there because it's affordable, or they might choose to live there because of that efficiency and that, you know, environmental, that smaller environmental footprint that they want to have.
Tiny homes are definitely popping up, one as a transitional housing, you know, from houselessness to temporary, then moving on to permanent housing. It's within that context. We're seeing it in other locations, kind of to your point, where that's a choice to live in that type of home. I think the question that we'll want to, like, all of these are potential policy considerations. Like, you know, I think this conversation shows that there is not one silver bullet policy that, you know, solves housing in all forms. So this is probably, like I said, the stickiest subject that we're going to be facing within the comprehensive plan, but kind of getting to that need for kind of different needs for different folks within the housing kind of realm is something that we'll have to continue to keep talking about. And tiny housing, I think, is, you know, a lot of communities are starting to look at that in various ways.
Got another comment?
Sure.
Oh, yeah, I'd just like to, you know, back up what Tony said too, is, you know, we talk about adding a lot, but I noticed we haven't talked a lot about the infrastructures, and, you know, we do add these things, especially when we're taking down, like someone said, you know, one house, putting in a 6-plex or 4-plex, and the lack of sewer systems, you know, the utilities, things like that. I think we need to keep that in consideration too. So the city doesn't come to a point where, oh my gosh, you know, look at what we have now. We've added all these structures and we don't have an infrastructure in place to support them. So I think as long as we keep bringing that up to the forefront, I think that's really important.
That's a great point.
We can only stress the system so far.
Yeah, and they have to function efficiently, and so
have to function.
Yeah, that's a great point, and definitely one that's what we had talked about earlier, about how it's kind of a Christmas tree of your policy framework on, you know, how things start to hang off of each other. You know, housing and land use is directly related to transportation and infrastructure, utilities, you know, all of those elements. And so those are some of the pieces that we'll have to, you know, figure out within that policy framework to make sure that they all work together. We have just a few more minutes. Are there any other questions on housing? You know, as we close it out, certainly we're not coming to an agreement. We just wanted to have this conversation tonight to start getting to think about what some of these policies might be. James, you had your hand up.
Just quickly, I think it would be wise. I was able to connect with Susan Davis, who I think she's still, I don't know if she's still there, but she was at the first meeting. And she provided some really helpful information about our buildable lands. It seemed like there's some good reasons to really look closely about how did we do our buildable lands assessment? Is our current evaluation of our buildable lands really very solid? If we're planning based off of our buildable land not being quite exactly what we have in our documentation, and exploring options if there are properties like hers that could be included in the city. To think seriously about how can we support that.
You know, certainly I think, you know, we have done buildable lands. We talked about this actually at City Council. James, Susan was there also to discuss that. And, certainly that'll be, you know, I feel comfortable with kind of where our buildable lands were and how it was evaluated. I think some of the questions around critical areas and what's developed since 2020, I think, Kate, I always get that number, 2019, 2020, all the cities are different. And so, kind of what's developed since then and what's still available. I feel like we have a defensible process, but if folks are, curious or, concerned about that, we can certainly, talk about that at our next meeting if we need to, about, kind of the methodology around buildable lands. But, we did use county data. We did step through, I think, a pretty rigorous process with the city to make sure that any parcels that have been developed since that buildable lands inventory was completed has been accounted for and then actually credited to our targets, because anything that happens after that, is stopped, we get credit for anything that happens after that. So we'd be able to account for that. But also, I think one of the important elements is critical areas within those buildable lands. We've accounted for all of that within that. So it's just because it's vacant or identified as redevelopable on a map doesn't mean that we're actually considering all of that vacant or redevelopable. And we're looking at wetlands and riparian buffer, steep slope, all of those issues too. So I feel comfortable with it. But certainly we can revisit at the committee if folks want to do that.
So Alex, I do want to add, Lance and I have been talking about this a lot, and we, just because of the questions that continue to come up, we will plan a presentation. We're actually looking at the city council as the most appropriate, but we might repeat it here, walking through what the county did, the time points, that's April 1st of 2019, April of 2020, all the development that has occurred since. But there are some pieces that I just want to remind everybody, we are trying to avoid we don't want sprawl. That is one of the key elements of the Growth Management Act. You need to work within the boundaries that you have, and land is a finite resource. So as we're talking, and there are major challenges with Monroe in the sense that we're trying to protect the character and we want to protect the housing stock. But the reality is we are continuing to grow and we don't have housing for certain segments of our population right now. We are at a deficit for affordable apartments. We don't have a whole lot. And so I completely agree that this is going to be a super challenging conversation, and the policies we need to be really considerate about. But from the buildable lands, we do want to educate. We have done our due diligence. You have built your model based on that. And so we're happy to do it with the CAC, but I also want to take it to the city council just because it's been so many questions are being asked and we would like to provide that information.
And it's already decided what's the buildable lands because it's been negotiated between the city and the county. I mean, nothing's going to change. You're just going to be explaining.
Yes, we are explaining what happened, but part of this process for the comprehensive plan is what can we change? What policies can we change? Where do we have opportunity to upzone? Where do we have opportunity to have a middle housing overlay, trying to accomplish these things that we're talking about tonight? These are the tools. So this is your base, but how do you change to accomplish the goals that we are trying to do for the city of Monroe, but also the bigger picture as a community within Snohomish County, the Puget Sound region, and the state of Washington.
Right, my point is just that what is considered buildable land within the city has already been defined.
Absolutely.
What we do with that land is what we're going to go through this process for.
Right, there's just a lot of confusion about the buildable lands in itself,
Yeah.
and so we're gonna
I
provide
don't
it.
want people to get hoped that, oh,
Yeah, it's
gee,
not changing.
Yeah,
It's not
the buildable
changing.
land is not changing. What we do to the buildable land as far as density and such
Yeah.
and policy, that can change.
Yeah, and a couple other things, just for James's and for the rest of the group. The city of Monroe did not look at expanding our urban growth area. We have the corporate limits and we have areas that are unincorporated today that the city could annex anytime. If it's in our urban growth area, we can annex. There just have to be a will, a desire by either the city or private property owners. But for the, to expand our area, we did not make an application with Snohomish County. That is not an option for us. However, there are two applications in with the county. One is the Davis application. The other one is a county council initiative for property that's off of Roosevelt Road. So as we're talking about this, from the city's perspective, we cannot push that boundary. We have a finite area we're dealing with today. So we're gonna educate about buildable lands, but there's other pieces that we don't have control over, I guess, what I wanna make sure you all understand.
Thank you, Kate.
There's a question, Janelle.
Yeah, I was thinking like as the builders and new housing comes, I'm wondering if there's like an agreement that the city can do with the builders to where there is new infrastructure that they have to do to put in place. I know that's kind of something they already do, but a policy that allows the city to add for like we were saying, sewer or internet or just, you know, things that are necessities as we think about affordable housing. So just dropping that in.
No, great, thank you. And you know, part of like for affordable housing specifically, it can also go the other way for incentives to be able to provide that type of, you know, infrastructure. So yeah, thank you. All right, so we are just about at time. Any other comments regarding buildable lands? So we should have put that on the agenda right in the beginning, James. Any other comments about middle housing, our outline, our principles? This is a great meeting and a great discussion, and I apologize for all the text on the slides. I usually like to have more images, but that's what it was tonight. So anything else for this group tonight? Otherwise, I'll jump into next steps. All right. So in terms of next steps, so we stepped through all of the major elements in your packet tonight, both the proposed outline for the Monroe 2044 document as well as the principles. Please review those if you have, you know, based on the conversation tonight. We'll go through and redline the principles and get those back out to you. But as you're reading those and something else comes up, feel free to reach out to Kate or myself so that we can incorporate those edits. And I guess from a deadline standpoint, it'd be great to have those by, let's say, a week from today. Could we do that? So 12, is that 12/11, I believe, a week from today, week from Monday. If you have any other final thoughts on that, we'll still have another bite at this, but just so that we can wrap up kind of this phase of editing for those principles. As we kind of close out 2023, amazingly, it's gone very quickly. We'll continue working. We are starting to work on the supplemental environmental impact statement. That includes the environmental analysis and other pieces. Other elements that are moving in parallel process right now are the transportation planning, as well as the utilities, sewer, stormwater, and water. Those relied on the work that Sungyo did to put the scenarios together. So they'll start their planning in earnest. So they're working on that now. And so I expect we'll be meeting with you early 2024 to start talking more in depth about some of the policies. And I forget what we have in line for you early, but you know, kind of as the policy work relates to the environmental process, yeah, draft policies can be considered what's called mitigation. So as we get into things like housing and we have to address middle housing and racially disparate impacts, some of the policies that we talked about tonight can actually be some of those measures to be able to address those impacts. So we'll be starting to develop that policy around the major elements within the comprehensive plan and then bringing that back to you. So I imagine the review is going to be similar to what we had for the principles tonight. We're going to want to break out the elements because it's a big chunk of work to be able to get through that. So we are going to be breaking out the elements to start talking about those specific policy pieces. So spring will be busy for us and for the advisory committee, but just kind of want to give you a heads up. You're off the hook after the final comments this year, but I'd say probably end of January, early February, we'll probably be back meeting again to start talking about some policy. we need to get into the framework a little bit more, but that's what I'm imagining in terms of schedule. And then we have 3 more meetings, so we'll be stepping through that in an iterative process. Kate, Anita, or Lance, anything else on schedule? Does that capture that, or anything else we need to include?
No, I think Zach had sent out tentative dates for all of these meetings.
That's right.
You received, yeah, the full series was sent out a while ago, so tentative dates are already on their calendars.
Okay. And I obviously don't remember exactly what that meeting
follow
tentative date
you.
is. So. But yeah, so there's a bunch of stuff coming, but it's going to be stuff like this. And then ultimately, again, in summer, we'll be getting out of the draft EIS. We'll be getting into final EIS with a future land use map, and then into the formal comprehensive plan. So we're working on all the pieces now, and just kind of keep getting, refined as we move forward. So with that, it's about 9. Kate, do you want to close us out?
Sure. Are there any more questions this evening? No. Okay. Planning Commission working on their work plan for next year. City Council, I will be going with, well, Lance and I will be going with the ethics conversation. And then I will be scheduling for buildable lands early January, might go into February. So I just want to say thank you for your commitment tonight, the conversation, much appreciated.
Oh, James, you had your hand up, sorry.
Just one thing is, if between now and the next time we meet, there's interesting or kind of significant developments, would it be possible to have a little like email brief to the CAC and say, hey, just FYI, because then there won't be as much to to recap in our next meeting.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Those
Happy to do that. So
let's put city council meetings with like the last presentation would be nice to get a summary, the minutes or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, James, that's a great idea. We're happy to do that. All right. Well, with that, then, everybody had a great set of holidays. It's hopefully we'll get a little bit of sun. It's been pouring down rain, so I guess it is winter. But
New York or Oregon, right?
it's just so I tried to get to Seattle 3 times on Monday, and it was freezing fog, and it's winter. So, anyways, have a great set of holidays. We will see you in 2024. If anything pops up, feel free to reach out. And then James, I love your suggestion. We'll provide updates as things pop up in the other committees and just as things evolve. So thank you.
Thanks, Alex.
Thanks, Alex. Thank you, guys. Thanks, Cynthia.